Good evening, everyone. We're very happy to share with you this evening on the first of two classes, satsangs, that we'll be offering on the topic of Patanjali. And first, we want to greet all our friends who are watching online and our friends in Chennai who we will be with in person starting this coming Monday. So we'll be seeing you soon for the dedication of your beautiful new center. But let's start now with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswarji, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yoganandaji, saints of all religions, O great sage Patanjali, we humbly bow to you all. Guide our steps on the path of yoga, that we may advance with these great teachings and draw ever closer to union with God. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I first heard the name Patanjali many years ago as I began studying the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, particularly as expressed by his great disciple and our teacher, Swami Kriyananda. And there was always the phrase, Patanjali, the great exponent of yoga, Patanjali, the classic exponent of yoga. And it just became like a catchphrase. And I never thought much about it, even though I studied what he taught. But really, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are more than just a book, more than a presentation of philosophy. In a sense, they might be called the definition, the presentation of both the techniques and the states of consciousness that can be achieved by the techniques of yoga. And so they really, the more I began to understand what it meant, the classic exponent of yoga, the great exponent of yoga, I began to see that all teachings of every great saint of India in modern times, meaning this yuga, all draw the basis of what they teach from Patanjali. In Autobiography of a Yogi, there are many references to Patanjali, to him as a person and to his Yoga Sutras. To him as a person, Master says, he calls him one of the great avatars of India, included him with Krishna, Rama, Buddha, and Patanjali. He said these were all avatars of ancient India. So this places him in a different category than just a philosopher or someone who codified the teachings of yoga. But the reason the Yoga Sutras stand in such a unique position in all of the science of yoga is that they are not just a presentation of techniques, but there are 4 books in these Yoga Sutras, and it's said that there are generally agreed 196 of the different sutras. But the first book describes more the consciousness of what an enlightened yogi is. So it isn't merely philosophy. And Swamiji makes a very important distinction in his book, The Art and Science of Raja Yoga, where he said philosophy is more like what is taught and studied in the West. Philos meaning love, Sophia meaning wisdom, so the love of wisdom. But Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are not a philosophy. They are more, Swami puts it so clearly, he said they are more like darshan. They themselves are a vision of light. So it isn't just studying systems of thought. Many of us have studied the Western philosophers, and at the end of a study of Nietzsche or Kant or Hegel, you come away thinking, oh, weren't they intelligent? And oh, aren't I intelligent because I studied them? But it doesn't change your consciousness one bit. In fact, if anything, it might kind of builds the ego because you're thinking how clever you are to understand them. But with Patanjali, it's different. The first book is more like, one could say, Master's poem, Samadhi, where he tries to really describe what these states of consciousness are. And that's why Swamiji said it's more like darshan than actual study of a philosophy. Because if we are, to the extent we are open ourselves, to the extent that we can attune ourselves to what Patanjali is saying, then we get a glimpse. Darshan meaning to see the light, to receive the light from a saint, enlightened being, and from the Yoga Sutras themselves. And so they themselves can provide us with darshan. And what Patanjali tried to do is to first describe the subtlety of the various states of enlightenment. And then in the further books, he gives the padas, or the further steps of the sutras, he gives us techniques and teachings and very practical guidance about how we achieve these states. And these, the most famous of this are the Eightfold Path, or the Eight-Limbed Path, which Jyotish will go to talk to in more detail shortly. But again, in the autobiography of a yogi, this great gift to the world, Master refers to Patanjali many times. He refers to him in the chapter Years in My Master's Hermitage, where he's sitting listening to Sri Yukteswar expound the great teachings, and then a mosquito lands on his arm, about to drive, as Master says, his lethal hypodermic into my arm, and he's just about to swat the mosquito, and then he remembers Patanjali. He remembers the niyama of nonviolence. And he stops this swing, and Sri Yukteswar, who was able to read his every thought, said, "Why don't you go ahead and finish the blow?" And Master was thinking about ahimsa. And Master said to his guru, "What do you mean? Are you in favor of killing?" And he said, Patanjali was talking about eliminating the desire to kill. And so it goes back even further than just the act. And again, ahimsa formed the foundation, and importantly so, historically in India, of Mahatma Gandhi's movement for the freeing of India from British colonization, and his movement where they practice under great physical harm, ahimsa, no matter what the British did to them, they would not strike back. And it gave them such soul power, more than any political maneuver or speech. It was the soul power, satyagraha, that enabled the Indians to throw off the British rule. And so these teachings have formed the bedrock of the consciousness, not only of yogis, but of the forming of the nation of India. And as well, there are direct references for those who are following the path of Kriya Yoga. There are direct references to Kriya in the Yoga Sutras, in the chapter An Autobiography of a Yogi, where the science of Kriya Yoga, Master said that Patanjali practiced Kriya, or a very similar technique. And there are two direct references in the sutras. One is Kriya Yoga is comprised of bodily discipline, mental control, and the listening to the sound of Om. And he goes at length describing Om, which is again one of the main techniques of our path and many other paths as well. But this is the first reference to Kriya. Second reference is that Kriya is that pranayam, and we'll discuss in the 8-limbed path that stage of pranayam. He said Kriya is that pranayam which separates the course of inhalation and exhalation. So by doing this, the particular pranayam of Kriya, we use our will and our mind force to direct what would normally be the prana flowing outward, but to direct the flow of that prana inward, so it becomes an inward flow in the subtle spine. And so Patanjali, there's a very deep link with our own path, the path of Kriya Yoga and of our line of gurus. And in I'll just talk briefly now, and then Jyotish will speak more about the Eightfold Path, but about the very first Yoga Sutra, which is Swami's explanation of it is so thrilling, because it might be something that you just read as a sentence and keep going, just as in Master's interpretations of the Bhagavad Gita. If you haven't read the commentaries, the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, Master said that first chapter of the Gita is often just skimmed through, thinking it's a list of warriors and the weapons that they had and the conchas they had. But really that first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita sets up the whole symbolism of the Gita. Similarly, the very first Yoga Sutra, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirod, sets up the whole basis on which these sutras are founded, are developed, I should say. And so in English, that's translated, and now we come to the study of the science of yoga. Okay, let's move on. But Swami says no, and this is based on Master's commentaries, and Master based his commentaries on the training he had from Sri Yukteswar. Master says in some lectures that he gave on Patanjali, now I can share the great teachings of my great guru, Sri Yukteswar. So there's a wonderful lineage in these commentaries. And so now we come to the study of the science of yoga. What this means is there are things that have preceded it, that we have been traveling already on a journey of understanding, a quest to experience the truth of the deeper truth of reality. So what is he referring to now? He's referring to other systems of yogic thought. And we'll use that term rather than philosophy, which is more limited in its scope, but systems of thought. The first one being Sankhya thinking. And this is the concept behind Sankhya is that this world is not what it seems, that it is based on duality. And if we try to find anything of permanent happiness, permanent value, something that lasts for a long period of time, we can't find it in this world, because this world is transitory. And coming from the West myself, this is something that is new, a new thought in the West, because in the West we're always trying to find our happiness and our fulfillment and our security outside of ourselves. But now we come to the study of Sankhya, which says, try as you might, you will not find what you're looking for in the material world, because it essentially has no reality in and of itself. The only way to find true happiness and, in fact, bliss, the only way to find true security, in fact, eternal peace, the only way to find truth, meaning, in fact, eternal truth, is through the interiorization of our consciousness. And so we can say that the Sankhya philosophy, and Swamiji says, this is the why we need to study yoga, because we will not find meaning or value, fulfillment in life in any other way. And then the other aspect of yogic thinking is Vedanta. And the Vedanta, we can say, is the what we are looking for. Shankaracharya described God as Sat Chidananda, ever conscious, ever existing. Master added the term ever new bliss or joy. And so this is the goal of what we are seeking. Sankhya is the why, Vedanta is the what. And now we come to the study of the science of yoga, and that is the how. How we can go about this, what the stages are, and the 8-limbed or the 8-fold path of Patanjali. It's not, people have the misconception that it's, okay, you make this step and then this step and this step, but it doesn't work like that. What Patanjali is describing is the transformation of the consciousness of the yogi, of the yoga practitioner, as he interiorizes his mind, as he achieves inner stillness, as he detaches from involvement with the world, as he perceives that there is a reality beyond the physical creation. And so now we come to the study of the science of yoga, is so rich with meaning. And everyone, that's why I think most of you probably know this, but the term sutra means a very concise, pithy statement. And the English word suture, little stitch, comes from that word. And so each of these statements, each of these little sutras can be meditated on and thought of and trying to draw the fullness of its meaning. And that's how Sri Yukteswar trained Master. They would read one Yoga Sutra, and then they would meditate. And then Sri Yukteswar would make a comment, and then they'd meditate hours more. And they would study each one in such a way. And so with the study of Patanjali, when did Patanjali live? We don't really know. Master says in autobiography, scholars generally attribute him to the 2nd century before Christ. But the fact that Master says this, he wouldn't say it if he didn't agree with it in the autobiography of a yogi. So I think he's saying that's probably as close as we can get. And so this great book that has been given to us, this great vision of what life is about, how we can find freedom, is the bedrock of every teaching of yoga. Every guru, every teacher of the practices has to base what he says on Patanjali, because it's rooted in the truth of the soul's evolution through the practices given to us through the great science of yoga, India's great gift to the world. And Patanjali presents it in a concise and powerful way, but one that is not easily understood.
Thank you, Devi. That was wonderful. I'm going to move the mic up just a little bit. There we are. So this is the book that we have been working from. It's Demystifying Patanjali by Swami Kriyananda. I spent a very interesting afternoon of study. I did something that I haven't done for quite some time. And in fact, I'm going to recommend it to all of you who are watching. I knew that I couldn't read this whole book, although I've read it before several times. I knew I couldn't read it all in just today in order to prepare. But what I decided to do was to read each of the sutras themselves, the 196. Now, that doesn't take very long. You could probably do it in an hour, between an hour and 2 hours. But whether you can do it with holding your concentration or not, I don't know. But reading through the whole flow, the whole scope of what Patanjali was saying here, gives the mind, as Devi was saying, it's better to call this darshan. When you read through the sutras, you have a darshan of the truth, a darshan of the potential of consciousness, not just the potential, but the inevitable goal, the inevitable place that we will all come to of consciousness that is so great and so vast that I don't think anybody who is interested in yoga, interested in these teachings, or probably anyone who has lived in India, I don't think that you can read this book without your mind becoming more uplifted than it has been in a long time. Meaning this book, read the sutras. What I would really like to recommend to each of us is between now and our second class, which will be a few weeks away, that we try at the very least to read through each of these sutras. Even better would be to be in a calm state, either read them before meditation or just after meditation, and read a few at a time and try to absorb deeply what they're saying. Sometimes we, as somewhat trained yogis who've read this philosophy, have studied, again, philosophy is the wrong word, but read these teachings and studied these teachings for some time, we have a basic understanding of what Patanjali is referring to. But having a basic understanding and really getting in touch with that on a deep level, that's the difference that Devi was referring to, where Sri Yukteswar would take a single sutra and then he would read that, and then they would meditate for an hour or 2 hours, and then he would give a little explanation of it, and then they would meditate longer. But first of all, I would like to suggest that we read through relatively quickly so that we see the scope of what Patanjali was talking about. I must say that India is the guru of the world, and any country, any land that can produce a thinker, produce a sage, produce an avatar that could write down these Yoga Sutras, that is enough for the legacy of India to be alive forever and forever, because these are eternal truths, and Patanjali goes at them so succinctly and yet so deeply that it's just quite a marvel. Now, the very word, the Yoga Sutras, describes what he's really working with here, because basically what you find in reading through this, even in the first one, as Devi was saying, and now we come to the study of the science of yoga. Even in that first one is mentioned yoga. And so what Patanjali is working with throughout this entire scripture is the fact that there is a state of yoga, a state of union, and he tells what it is, tells how we can achieve it, he tells the qualities of it, he tells the different levels of it, but this state of samadhi or yoga that we are all destined to achieve, there is that state of consciousness, and that is completely different. That is a different realm from our normal living consciousness, because when we're not in that state of yoga, when we're not unified with all that is, when we're not beyond the ego, then the ego relates to a world, a phenomenal world, a world of the senses, a world of desires, a world of attachments, a world of up and down, of light and dark, of duality. The ego relates to that world of duality in such a way that the basic delusion, the fundamental delusion is, first of all, ego, that separation. But the fundamental delusion is that the world that the ego perceives is the real world. And it's not the real world. It is the false world. And so one of the things that you find in reading Patanjali is, and reading through those Yoga Sutras, the 196 of them, is that there is again and again and again brought to your consciousness the contrast between that which is real, the world of yoga, and that which is unreal, which is the world of the phenomenon that we inhabit and are so caught up in and so committed to and so entranced by, and yet that world is the world of duality, and it will never bring us permanent happiness because it's unreal, as Devi was saying. Moreover, it brings us alternating pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain. And we're always trying outwardly in this phenomenal world to hold on to the pleasure or hold on to the happiness and avoid the pain. And we can never do that because it's like a wave motion. Every wave that goes up must in fact come down. And every height, every crest of a wave must have a corresponding trough to the wave. And so as long as we inhabit that world, we will never know our true self. We'll never know our true potential. And so Yoga Sutras means that Patanjali again and again is referring back to yoga, not yoga postures, not yoga philosophy even, not yoga anything, but a state of consciousness. So one might call this the Union Sutras. When we're in a state of union, our consciousness is completely different than when we're in a state of non-union or a state of ego consciousness. I'm going to read just the first 4 Yoga Sutras from this book, just to give a sense of the scope of this. And then I'm going to go on and talk about the Ashtanga Yoga, or Eightfold Path. So, as Devi said, although Swami states it slightly differently in this scripture, let's see. Okay, so scripture, this is the first of the 4 padhas, or first books, and this is the first of all the sutras. The subject now being offered is yoga, and we've been talking about that. But the subject being offered is the consciousness of union, rather than, any practices. So he's going to talk about the practices that get us to that state. But always the reference is coming back to that state. Then the second one, and this is such a deep and great sutra. Yoga, that state of consciousness, is the neutralization of the vortices of feeling. Yogas chitta vritti nirod. Yogas chitta vritti nirod. It means Master talked about chitta as being, he called it primordial feeling. It's the nature really that is just a step away from pure intuition. Pure intuition is just the knowing of how things are. Feeling is, one could almost call it the echo, chitta, the echo of pure intuition, so that you feel the kindness of a And because the feeling nature wants us to have part of that duality, the positive part, the part that feels positive to us, and to hold that state and not have that which feels negative to us, and avoid that state, because there's that desire for avoidance and desire for acceptance or attainment of the positive. That's what keeps us caught in the world of duality, because it is duality in itself. So Patanjali is saying here that when we neutralize, because every time we want something, let's say we want, I don't know, we want to become married, to get married. So if we want that, then the mind begins to form a lot of subsidiary thoughts and desires and actions around that. That's why Swami describes it, Patanjali, of course, says it, but Swami says it's not the waves of, some people have translated this, the waves of mind stuff. It's not. It's the vortexes, the whirlpools that form around a desire or a dislike. And that vortex draws the consciousness in and holds it, just as if there's something floating and it comes to a vortex in a stream. It doesn't float down the stream. It gets caught in that vortex and it spins around. And as long as that vortex of chitta, of desire, is there, the thoughts will spin around. The consciousness, the likes, the dislikes, the whole mindset will spin around in that. So we have to neutralize that. And when we neutralize it, then the consciousness flows on. And so as soon as we neutralize it, I say it as if it's simple, but it is the culmination of thousands of lifetimes. But as soon as we neutralize that, we are automatically in the state of union, in the state of yoga. That's what he says. Yoga is the neutralization of those whirlpools of chitta. Then the third one is, then spiritually free, the sage abides tranquilly in his inner self. And so we just abide in ourself. We aren't drawn into any false relationships. We aren't drawn into any sense of duality, because in that state there is no duality. And so we simply abide in ourselves. And in that state is what Devi was saying, Shankaracharya defined that as Sat Chidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, ever new bliss. And then the fourth one is, otherwise, if one doesn't reside in that state, or if one hasn't found inner peace, the vrittis cause the indwelling self to assume many outward forms. And so those whirlpools of vrittis that spin around, they cause desire, they cause aversion, and because of that, we have to incarnate again and again and again in order to experience or resolve those desires and those aversions. And so until we neutralize those, we are condemned to incarnate into this world of Maya, into this world of duality, and to be drawn into a world that is in and of itself false. It's like being drawn into a dream. It's God's dream, it's the dream of primordial nature. Nonetheless, it's an unreal reality, as a dream is unreal. And so we are seeking to get out of that. But Patanjali describes the state of samadhi, the state of union. He describes what it is, what it isn't, how we achieve it, what steps bring us toward it, what obstacles keep us from it. And so in all of these beautiful sutras, we're given a glimpse into a reality that is so deep and so vast that, as I say, if that alone were the legacy of India, India would be considered the guru of the world. But later on, the first pada, the first book, is Samadhi Pada, it's called. And that describes the state of union, what it is and isn't, and so on. Then he comes to the second book, which is Sadhana Pada, the practices that we can undertake in order to get us to that state. And the gemstone of that is his description of Ashtanga Yoga, or the eightfold, eight-limbed path. And when Master was in the United States, for many, many years, for about 10 or 12 years, maybe even longer, when he was in Mount Washington or Encinitas, and when he was in residence there, he drew together his devotees, and he would give on Sunday afternoon, after the talk that was given generally in one of the churches, he would give a lecture for the general public, but then he would draw the devotees together, and he would give discourses in Patanjali. And he gave about, over the years, he gave about 45 or 50 of those discourses. Unfortunately, we're not able to copyright them, and the copyright would be a little bit under question, and so we aren't able to publish those. But I say this more not to tease you with, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to get my hands on that. I say it because this was so fundamental that it was basically Master's way of teaching his disciples week after week, year after year, for many, many, many courses. Of all the central themes that he touches on in there, among the most central is non-attachment. Detaching the consciousness from these vortices of likes and dislikes. But central to all of that is the Eightfold Path, or Ashtanga Yoga. And the first two, in meditating on this, one of the ways that it has helped me to understand it is think of three concentric rings. So an outer ring, a ring inside of that, and then a central, one might say, like a target, a bullseye, with an outer ring, an inner ring, and then the bullseye itself. And that outer ring is the yamas and the niyamas. Those basically describe how to have proper interactions if we find ourselves in this world of duality, if we find ourselves in the world of perception of non-unity. Therefore, there are objects, there are people, there's us, there's them, there's us, there's God, there's Guru, all of that. Wherever we are having a perception where there are multiple things in that are not me, that means the me always is the ego. And so Patanjali starts by accepting that we're in that state where we have an ego and we're relating to a world that seems to be not us. So we're not in the state of union, we're not in the state of yoga, but this is how to get into that state. And so he says that if we're in that outer state, then we must control our behavior, control the behaviors that put us out of resonance, put us in conflict with the world around us. And we have to control those basic 5 behaviors. We have to control the tendency to be violent or to be dominant over others or other things. We have to control the tendency to tell falsehoods. So the first is non-violence, or ahimsa. The second is non-lying, or satya. We have to control the tendency to do something dishonest, to purposely distort reality, in other words. Then we have to, it has sometimes been described as non-stealing, but Swami talks about it as non-covetousness. To covet something is to want something that isn't yours. Stealing is the act of taking that from somebody else, but it begins by coveting something, wanting something that isn't yours. See, even the thought that there's a me and a something that isn't mine, we're already caught in ego. And if we don't control that kind of behavior, it just enmeshes us deeper and deeper into that world of ego. So non-covetousness. Then the 4th one is non-sensuality, or brahmachari. It is the withdrawal, especially from sexuality, because this sexual desire is extremely powerful. It is, one might say, there are 2 primordial desires that keep this whole world of Maya going. The one is the desire to continue to exist, and the second is the desire for sexuality, or for passing on your genetic material, a scientist might say. And those 2 are huge primordial desires that go all the way down into the very foundation. Paramecian have those desires or those activities. And so those are hugely deep desires that keep us enmeshed in this world. And so to withdraw from that is to hold our energy from going there. And then finally is non-greed, or even that which we do have, like food. We do have need, as long as we're in the body, of eating food, but not to eat too much, not to take even that which we have, not to take too much of it. The second are the niyamas, and that's to allow our energy to flow in those ways that will allow us to be harmonious with the world, or to work in resonance with God's natural laws. And I'll just touch quickly because we're running out of time. Cleanliness, contentment, austerity, self-study, and the study of God, or contemplation on God. And so we should allow our energies to flow in those directions. So that outer ring is how we relate to the world. The ring inside of that is increasing our stillness, because in stillness, in deep stillness and concentrated, focused consciousness, comes this state of samadhi. And that state is also called meditation, the deep stillness of consciousness. And so the next 3 are increasing levels of stillness. The first is asana, stilling the body so that we don't move, we don't fidget, the body itself ceases to become an obstacle to stillness. Next is pranayama, and basically all of our techniques that we have on this path are techniques of pranayama. And so prana is the life force or the energy, and as long as it is in movement in the subtle body, because we have a pranic body, as long as that prana is in movement, as long as it isn't still, our minds cannot become still. And so the techniques of our path is to bring prana into a state of stillness. And when we do so, then the other thing that disturbs the consciousness, keeps us restless and outward, are the senses. And when we still the prana and withdraw from the senses, then they no longer cease to bother us. When we're able to achieve that, so that's the second circle in. When we're able to achieve that, then we get into what we might describe as the bullseye. And Patanjali lumps, there are three aspects to that. Increasing depth of union, one might say. He lumps them together and calls them samyama. And those three are dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Dharana, so here the energy, the body has been stilled, prana has been stilled. Ultimately, we will have gone breathless. That would be the stillness of it. The energy has been withdrawn from the senses, and in that state, we're able to be completely concentrated. And so dharana is a state of deep concentration, complete concentration. Let's use the example of concentrating on the light. In the state of dharana, we would be concentrated on the light at the spiritual eye, and we would have no other thoughts except seeing that light. The mind would not be wandering at all. But there would still be the sense of I am seeing that light. In the state of dhyana, true meditation, dhyana in India is used as the word for meditation. In that state of deep absorption, we don't have the perception of I and the light. We are so absorbed that all there is the light. And so we're deeply absorbed. And it could be on Om, or it could be, Master said, that true meditation is dhyan, that state of absorption on God or on one of the 8 aspects of God. So it could be absorption in light, absorption in sound, Om, in joy, in love, peace, calmness, and so on. But we would be completely absorbed in that during the state of dhyana. And then finally, in the state of samadhi, we would realize that whatever we're absorbed in, for instance, light, if we're completely absorbed and can hold that, then we realize that it isn't this ego that's light. It isn't me that's light. It's just light. Light is everywhere. I am that everywhereness. I am the light of all of creation. And that breaks the sense of separate ego. And in that broken ego, we reside in the state of yoga. And so, in summation, Patanjali talks again and again about that state of union, how we will achieve it. He gives the Eightfold Path as a very succinct way of knowing how to achieve that. And in that practice of the Eightfold Path, we will get into a state of samadhi, of samyama. And then he talks about what happens in that state. We develop powers, we develop perceptions, on and on. But as I say, we will again in a few weeks have our second class on Patanjali. Between now and then, as a homework assignment, let's all read each of the 196 sutras of Patanjali so that we have, if possible, several times, but at least once, so that we have a sense of the scope of these great, great teachings. God bless you.